Well, that got interesting, didn't it? Ohio State is making a final pitch at the country's top-ranked offensive lineman. The signing period is 1 week away, and Ohio State is hosting a ton of top talent on campus this weekend for the game. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. This is Talking Stuff on the podcast. Andrew Ellis is going to join me right now to talk about all that and more. Andrew Ellis joins me now. Welcome to Talking Stuff. Andrew, hope you're having a beautiful week. The holiday is coming. We have the game on tap, and it feels like winter has finally arrived in Ohio. But yet, in the midst of all that, the thing we're talking about the most is David Sanders. David Sanders, who showed up last week. This is one of those visits, man, that like when they happen, you're like, oh boy, like no one knew about this. Anyone who says they did or had like a real inclination that it was going to occur is probably fibbing a little bit at minimum, and a lot most likely, because he showed up on Saturday, and I wrote about it on Sunday afternoon on our Rivals website. But there were like high level Ohio State recruiting staffers who told me at the game on Saturday that they had no idea he was coming until they saw him and his family there. And they're like, oh, this is a state secret about what to expect with David Sanders. And so let's just break it down. David Sanders committed to Tennessee in August. Ohio State was the runner-up at the time. It's a recruitment that, like, in June, after his official visit, I think there was a lot of people who believed Ohio State might have done enough to win that fight. And then there's the 2-month delay between when he made his official visit and his announcement. Tennessee got a final visit in at the end of July that maybe seemed to separate things for the Volunteers. Committed in August, has not been anywhere else since other than Ohio State this past weekend. There was no discussion about him looking around. I mean, if you look back at the stories about David Sanders in late August and early September, it's I'm going to be at every Volunteers game. I'm going to be there recruiting for Tennessee. And admittedly, I have not kept up on their recruiting visitors list every single week, so I'm not going to say that I have. But I don't know that any of that happened, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of it.
Yeah, so I slept in a little bit on Saturday, and I woke up and I had all these texts about David Sanders, and I was obviously quite happy about that. If you're an Ohio State fan who follows recruiting and you could pick one guy to just randomly make a surprise visit for the 2025 class, I mean, that's without question the guy you're looking at. So certainly that's good news, first of all. As far as the Tennessee visits that you just alluded to, from what I know, he visited Knoxville for their win over Alabama. And I don't think he had been back there since then, from what I read. So I don't know. I'm just kind of I don't know. It's just wild how something like this stays under the radar. I don't know. I don't believe the Tennessee guys who have alluded to, oh, I knew about this, I just didn't want to mention it, because that's BS. You're going to put that out there if you know that. You're going to prepare your audience for what might be happening. I mean, you would do the same thing, I think.
Well, but you also would do that because the reality is by publicizing the visit, you severely diminish the odds of it happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly true. So I think that was just a bunch of BS. I think it caught everyone off guard. How do you think something like this comes about on the Ohio State side to where some of the recruiting staffers don't even know about this? Do you think this is one of those things where Justin Fry was just completely working in silence and not telling people and just crossing his fingers that he shows up, and the next thing you know, he's there? Or how would you even think something like that would happen?
Well, I'm going to be as clear as I can here, and I want to be honest as possible about this. Like, this is conjecture, because in the time I've covered Ohio State football recruiting and the time I've known the people involved in it, I can't think of a scenario or a situation that has been more tight-lipped, more under seal than this last week has been, and not even last week, but last 5 days has been. My impression of this is that David Sanders and Justin Fry have maintained contact since the August 18th decision. I do not want to sit here and say it was like aggressive contact by Ohio State, because I do not believe that to be true. There was no doubt when he committed to Tennessee in August, that last week and a half, 2 weeks leading into the decision, that's where he was going from the Ohio State perspective. From a commitment perspective, like the other commitments, the peer-to-peer recruiting, none of them had an inclination that he was like still on the fence. Like it was like, okay, David's going to Tennessee. We did the best we could. the conversations have maintained since then, but it's been very cursory. It's been very, just checking in, hope you're good. It's not been like, hey man, we're here for you. We love you. We still want you here. It was almost my impression is that it was a maintain a tepid relationship for an eventual possible transfer. You know what I mean? Like because that's what you have to do now if you're a college football coach and you're in the recruiting world. Like you can't end relationships for a player like that because you just don't know what happens in the recruiting in the transfer portal a year from now or 2 years from now. So it seemed to me that it had been put back into just maintenance mode, making sure that you're still being available. And the belief that I've come to ascertain or whatever, I don't even know what I'm saying, to be honest, but I think like a week ago, there were conversations that began from the Sanders family, not from Ohio State, that really ramped this up. And so that led to the visit going down the way it did on Saturday morning and then staying through Monday. The thing that matters here ultimately is not that David Sanders visited. What matters is the why David Sanders visited. And that is, as of this point, as we record this in midweek, that is still very much up in the air. And I don't know that we're going to get a real answer from either the Tennessee side or the Ohio State side about what caused this. I have gleaned that like something happened with Tennessee. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what's causing it. I don't know if it's a matter of David Sanders not trusting Tennessee's development plan. I don't know if it's a matter of David Sanders and his family not being particularly fond of Glenn Ellerby, the offensive line coach at Tennessee, which would seem weird since they committed to him 4 months ago. But that's one thing I've heard from Tennessee sources, is that maybe there's not a great relationship there. Certainly the Tennessee fan base is almost as out on Glenn Ellerby as the Ohio State fan base has been on Justin Fry. I don't know if it's a matter of like NIL promises that were not being delivered or kept. I do know for a fact that this is not a situation where Ohio State extended an olive branch that was covered in extra money. Like, that much I know. This is not, and again, there have been a number of people I've talked to in the last 4 days about this recruitment. No one is saying anything concrete in the why column. But if I've asked a question about, is this why, and it wasn't the why, they have had no problem refuting it. So like over and over, I have been told this was not a money grab by Sanders or his family. This is not an NIL leverage play. Something happened and the visit happened. And now Tennessee is trying to mitigate the damage. And that's where we stand on Wednesday as this will be published. Like, no one knows. And yes, we can see now the Tennessee side starting to be like, oh, well, maybe he's going to stick. And I can't help but think that conversation is based solely on the fact that nothing has happened so far, not really as a result of information that would lead them to believe like that it's trending in that direction. Clearly, the visit, the timing of the visit, the length of the visit, the way that the visit was like handled in a private manner, and certainly not something that was publicized, or I'm under the impression that the Tennessee staff did not know about it probably until he was on the way to Columbus. All of those things would indicate to me that the momentum is in Ohio State's favor, but until he makes an official announcement or until he signs somewhere next Wednesday, it doesn't matter, right? So like, now we wait for the next steps, which is there a chance he shows up at Ohio State this weekend? 100% there's a chance that he shows up. Is there anyone who's willing to say, we feel confident he's coming back? No one is willing to say it. And that is because, I think that this topic and this recruitment now is in such a super sensitive mode that no one wants to say anything, because if he does visit, then, or if he does plan on visiting and it gets out, then again, it can be squashed. Or the family, they don't need this extra pressure. So now anything can happen from here between David Sanders, Ohio State, and Tennessee. And Andrew, like, you are by far the most pessimistic person I've ever met when it comes to Ohio State football recruiting. I mean, I've ever met, not that I've ever read online, because message boards and Twitter are insane. But you're the only person you're the most negative person I've met. And you are like convinced that this is definitely not going to happen, that this is just another tease and it's going to end up breaking bad for Ohio State. And I don't want to say you're wrong. I don't think it's an intentional tease by David Sanders and his family. I do think that there is an obvious reason that they made this visit, and it would not have happened unless they were very serious about considering a different option. But we have 1 week to signing period and nothing has happened. And so from here, to say it's 50-50 feels like an escape plan, but like, I don't know how else to put it. If he shows up at Ohio State again this weekend, I think you have to be like all aboard the train, right? But if until then, it's like, okay, now there's this one extra data point, the extra data point that he didn't get at Ohio State in July that he got at Tennessee in July. The one visit that Ohio State fans were furious that Ohio State wasn't hosting a big event on campus and David Sanders couldn't get back. Well, now he's got back, right? And he got back 2 weeks before the signing period. Tennessee does not play at home this weekend. They play at Vanderbilt. He's not going to be visiting there unless he made a midweek visit. There was some discussion about maybe visiting Georgia or somewhere else. That doesn't seem like it's happening. How do you feel about it today?
Well, you alluded to my pessimism. Most of my pessimism and negativity stems from being burnt at offensive tackle so many times. So that's kind of why it's hard for me to be optimistic here. I will admit, when I first saw that he was visiting, my first thought was the same thing that some of these Tennessee guys were saying. Is this just an agent-driven thing? Is this an attempt to raise the NIL offer down in Knoxville or whatever? I mean, I think that I was wrong on that, and I think everybody was wrong on that if that was your initial assumption. I would love to see him get back there this weekend. I have no idea if that's going to happen. I feel like it could be Friday night and we could still have no idea if that's going to happen. And it's just a matter of, does he show up? Yeah. I've read all the theories about, Justin Fry and Ryan Day have been texting him 24/7, which I cannot even fathom happening the week of the game, even any other week for that matter. I've seen stories about, the Tennessee fan base not liking the offensive line coach, which you mentioned. I've seen stories about he wants to obviously get into med school.
Also,
the
not
med
true.
school.
I mean, he may want to be in med school, but that is not part of this.
Driving.
Again, I have posited the theories to a number of people who are connected in this recruitment, and the things that they are willing to shoot down, they shoot down without problem. The worst thing that can happen here is that the wrong information becomes like the narrative, I think.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that the right information ever actually becomes public or known, but like there are things that are going to be talked about and rumored and bandied about. But I'm just saying, from an Ohio State perspective, the medical school stuff has been overblown. The NIL stuff has been shot down. Like, okay, I don't know. I mean, it's weird.
I mean, it could be as simple as depth chart. Ohio State's going to need two offensive tackles next season. Obviously, there's a chance Josh Simmons sticks around, whatever. But I mean, the depth chart's wide open. That's certainly something that matters. There's also that maybe he wanted to just come and watch a game between two top 5 teams. I don't think that's what happened. I think this is a genuine thing. You look at the Tennessee was just ranked number 8 in the playoff rankings. It's not like they've had a catastrophic season or anything like that. So I don't know. Maybe it's something we won't know until a week from now or a week and a half from now after he signs somewhere. But my level of optimism is rising. In a way, I like that the Tennessee side is not confident. They don't seem to be. They don't seem to know what the hell's going on. But if he were to show up on campus this weekend, then I'm going to go from about a 5 to a 9.5 on that confidence meter.
Yeah, I mean, I just know from our coverage of Ohio State football over the last 10 years, like if neither side knows what's going on, that's generally not a positive. Or if the team that he's committed to doesn't really seem to have a grasp of the circumstances, that's generally not a positive for that team. Now, it doesn't mean much, again, because we are in such a different era of college football that there are ways to fix problems very quickly, and whatever those problems are, that's the rub. I don't believe this was him just making a visit for a top 5 game, because if that's the case, he would have been in and out of town on Saturday. He would have told people he was coming. All those things don't make sense. But what makes sense is that Josh Simmons is a borderline first-round draft pick and would have been a first-round pick this year had he not got hurt. As a guy that transferred in from San Diego State as a right tackle that nobody in the country thought Ohio State should take. And Justin Fry helped develop him into a borderline first-round pick, a guy who many people had as the top left tackle in the draft heading into this offseason. Seth McLaughlin completely had his career revamped and revitalized in the 10 games he played at Ohio State. Those things matter. Donovan Jackson has moved because of his flexibility and what he's been able to develop by moving out to left tackle and showing what he can do and what he's developed into at Ohio State. Has probably gone from a late 50s, early 60s pick in the NFL draft to a late 30s pick. Like, those things are mattering. And Ohio State's main talking point with David Sanders throughout his recruitment was, show me where Tennessee has developed an offensive lineman, and show me where Glenn Ellerbe has developed an offensive lineman, because he hasn't. And so I don't know if it's just an accumulation of all these points or what, but something happened, and Ohio State stands in a position where they may be able to benefit from it. I don't want to tell people to get their hopes up and expect it to happen, but I think that it's realistic enough. And I hope people understand my approach well enough that I'm not going to sit here and blow sunshine up your butts just because I think that it's good for clicks. I do think this is moving in the right direction, but clearly a return visit this weekend would send it over the edge, I think. So we'll see if that happens. We could talk more about David Sanders and we will talk more about David Sanders as this unfolds, but not today. We should talk about 2 guys that did commit to Ohio State. Jordan Woods, a 3-star cornerback from Cartersville, Georgia, who was committed to the University of Cincinnati. Class of 2025, 6'3", 180-pound corner, who took 2 visits to Ohio State, one for the Nebraska game, one for the Indiana game, and committed Monday when he got home. Obviously, Ohio State wants 3 corners. They've wanted 3 corners in this class from the start. That's, if you recall, that's why they had Blake Woodby committed with Naeem Offord and Devin Sanchez. They've always wanted 3. People will look at the national ranking and say, well, wouldn't you have just been better off with Blake Woodby? I will contend that a 6'3", 180-pound corner who plays in Georgia and plays high-level football is a better development path type prospect than a 5'10", 170-pounder from the Baltimore area who has had trouble staying on the field because of injury. Blake will be a good corner down at Auburn, I think, but I think from a purely developmental path, if you look at these 2, I think you can see why Ohio State would want a player with Jordan Woods' frame and his natural speed.
Yeah, I mean, he's a traits guy. He's got the measurables, the length, and like you said, he plays against good competition, which is never a bad thing. And if it doesn't work out at corner, maybe he's a guy who could play safety too. So I've got no problem.
There's some Tyvis Powell in that game for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I've got no problem with that. I think the biggest question is going to be now, is he your corner 3 in the class, or is he your corner 2, which we'll talk more about that a bit later, I guess. But I like the pickup.
Yeah. Jordan Woods, I don't want to pass over him and not talk about him as much, but we'll get a chance to do more with him and get people a chance to know who he is over these next couple of days or weeks. But the other commitment is 2027 wide receiver Jameer Brown from Wayne High School in Huber Heights, Ohio. I have been extremely consistent in saying that it's hard to get excited about players who are that far away from signing. I think we could probably put that hesitation on pause for a minute, because you should definitely be excited about Jameer Brown. He is a 6'1", 180-pound wide receiver who is Olympic track level sprinter as he develops, an unbelievable receiver with the football in his hands, a kid that has dominated games for Wayne from his freshman year. He is the best Ohio wide receiver prospect. I mean, if we're going to count Chris Henry in there as an Ohio receiver prospect, then I would say that in the last 20 years, you probably have Chris Henry, Jameer Brown, and Ted Ginn Jr. in that conversation.
Maybe
as far
DeVere
as Ohio,
Posey,
maybe DeVere, but I would say Jameer Brown with his speed, it would be in a category with Ted Ginn and Chris Henry. DeVere is a very solid kid coming out of Cincy LaSalle, but not the physical traits that you see out of Jameer Brown. Like, this is one to get excited about in the class of 2027. Yes, long way to go, 2 years, but a local kid who was a wide receiver, like, there's always that the asterisk, like, as long as Brian Hartline's at Ohio State, then you don't really have to worry about this. And now you can build a class around a kid that is a special player who's only going to get better. And he has the luxury of being able to be on campus with Ohio State pretty much whenever he wants for the next 2 years to work with Brian Hartline to improve. And we've seen that, the way like the Tavian St. Clair relationship went and how that helped his development. Like, it's a huge commitment for Ohio State. It happened at 3:00 on Saturday in the middle of the Ohio State-Indiana game. So it's not really been discussed for a number of reasons, because A, the timing, B, the fact that he's a 2027. But this is a very likely 5-star prospect in that class. This is a kid that people should be thrilled about to have him in the class, and like no drama for his recruitment moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's early, but this kid's top 10 in the national rankings right now. He is just freakishly fast, and I mean, he'll help to lead the class. Hartline's brought in a lot. I mean, obviously Hartline's brought in a number of ridiculous receivers, but he doesn't really seem to bring in a bunch of those guys that are like just through the moon speed. I know Jeremiah Smith is freakishly fast for his size, but JSN wasn't really a speed guy. Olave and Wilson both ran really good times at the combine, I guess. But I don't know. He just seems a little bit of a different breed compared to what Hartline usually brings in, and I'm totally here for it because that kid's got some major wheels.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about like the comparison for Jameer Brown and where I would put him as far as like what archetype of Ohio State receiver he fits. And I guess I'm leaning towards like Emeka Egbuka coming out of high school. Emeka does not get really the credit that he deserves for his speed. But he is I don't know, that might even not be right. I don't know what it is, to be honest. You're talking about a burner here, like a burner, but he's not a Ted Ginn, like 10-2 guy. And he's also thicker and physically stronger than Teddy would have been at that time. So I don't really know the right comparison. I think Egbuka size-wise is probably the right one. But yeah, it's a really special run that Brian Hartline's been on. And the fact is, Brian Hartline's type is never been, as you said, about like straight line speed, because he wants guys who are fast, like getting in and out of breaks. And it's not about how fast you can run at your top speed. It's about how fast you can run your routes and how well you can maintain your speed through your routes and through your breaks. And like, those are all the things he'll work with Jameer Brown on over the next 2 years in order to make him a ready to play as a freshman receiver at Ohio State, because we're seeing the way that this new roster management is happening. Like, Ohio State takes their commitment from Jaden Ricketts. They've got the commitment from Bod Penn Miller. Like, it had been Jaden Ballard in 2021 since Ohio State had taken an in-state receiver. So now you have one in 25, one committed for 26, one committed for 27. But the difference between Bod Penn Miller and Jaden Ricketts and their expectations and their development path compared to Jameer Brown is night and day. Like, Jameer Brown is a get ready, here comes a superstar type player, where Jaden Ricketts and Bod Penn Miller are, okay, we're going to take some time to build these guys up into what we want. So again, more time probably than even I expected to talk about Jameer Brown on this show, but for a 2027 commit, this is definitely one to be excited about if you're an Ohio State fan.
Yeah, and I'm no track expert, but I think Teddy was a 10-2 as a junior, senior, and Jameer Brown was a 10-5 as a freshman, runner-up in the state. I don't know how someone's time typically improves from year to year, but I mean, I don't know. Maybe he gets close to that. Probably not, but we'll see.
Yeah, I would expect that he will. I mean, as he gets bigger and stronger, like he's the real deal. And I had some concerns about Jameer Brown and just the ability to catch the ball when I saw him at the Under Armour camp in April. And then he came back to Ohio State and camped in the first day of camp in June, and he was way better. So maybe he just had a bad day. And my initial, not that my evaluation matters or means anything, but my initial evaluation of him was like, okay, I can see the the raw product there, but it needs some refinement. And then what I saw out of him just 5 weeks after that was night and day. And so be excited about Jameer Brown. It's a big one. Andrew, you talked about Jordan Woods and whether or not he's going to be commitment number 2 or 3 in the secondary at corner for Ohio State. There's also obviously going to be some discussion about whether or not he is one of 4 people at corner, because Aiden West, the Michigan State commitment, took his official visit to Ohio State over the weekend. He's a guy that we talked about last week without naming names on this show. We knew that there was some discussion about a potential official visit coming for Aiden West. He's a 6'1", 185-pound kid from Quince Orchard High School in Gaithersburg, Maryland. 3-star prospect, but athletically super talented. He's run like over 22 miles an hour. He's been clocked at over 22 miles an hour this year for his high school team. Like he's a freaky type of athlete. Very raw at corner. He made his visit, was offered by Ohio State on this visit, which I think was a requirement almost. Like he wasn't going to take the trip if he didn't get an offer. And he got home, and then he decided he's going to take another visit to Michigan State this coming week to figure things out. There's Virginia Tech is also involved in this for recruitment. I get the sense from talking to Aiden a little bit that it seems like it's Ohio State and Michigan State. I'm not going to completely rule out Virginia Tech because they're very strong in the DMV, but I've heard some potential rumors that maybe there will be a coaching change at Vatech, which would change things pretty considerably and would remove them from consideration, I think, almost immediately. So what's interesting, Andrew, is that Aiden West has been recruited by Ohio State like really aggressively for about 10 days now, and he's made one visit to Ohio State. He's been committed to Michigan State since June, and he's only made one visit to Michigan State. So the trip that he takes back to East Lansing this coming weekend will be pivotal as he decides what he wants to do. And I think a lot of this discussion and like what he's waiting for is to figure out what happens with Naheem Offord at Ohio State, because he's not naive. He's not dumb. He's not blind to the fact that Ohio State has 3 corners committed, and 2 of them are the top 2 corners in the country. And while the opportunity in Columbus is great, the opportunity to go in and be cornerback number 1 in a class versus cornerback number 4 in a class is decidedly different. Michigan State will have to try and present that case. But when you look at this, I think it makes sense for the kid to not like immediately jump on the Ohio State offer.
Yeah, I totally get it from a kid's perspective. I mean, do you want to be the 3 or 4 corner in a class, or do you want to be, I haven't looked at Michigan State's commitments, honestly, but I assume he's going to be their 1 or 2 corner. As you said, I'm guessing it all comes down to Naheem Offord and what happens there. I would be totally fine taking this kid as a corner 3 or corner 4. But I guess we'll see how the weekend visit to East Lansing goes and see what Mr. Offord does this weekend too.
Yeah, it's just so weird. I wish I could really get into the heads of the people who do the rankings. I mean, as we look at the 247 Sports composite rankings, Aiden West is the number 98 ranked corner in the country. I'm sorry. Put on the tape, look at the size, look at the speed. It's not like, I don't know how you make a determination after like the top 15. They're all so similar in so many ways. I've really enjoyed talking to Aiden West over the last couple months. I started to have conversations with him in August because he's a name that I had heard that maybe Ohio State would do some evaluation of. Really great kid, really smart kid. Like he's not going to be hyper emotional about the offer from Ohio State. He's going to look at this from a business standpoint. And again, Michigan State is in a position where they are just trying to hold on to it because they have, 15 commits. Let's see, that he would be their, believe it or not, he's their 3rd highest ranked corner commit as well. Looking at the list right now, they've got LaRue Zamorano from California and George Mullins from Florida. And he is the 3rd ranked of their 3. So it's not entirely different from a path perspective, but obviously just Ohio State also will have Jermaine Matthews and Aaron Scott and Bryce West and all the other guys. What I think is pretty interesting, again, this is a kid who made his first visit to Ohio State over the weekend, when he posted like on Instagram the visit photos and that stuff, there were a lot of comments in there from Bryce West, from Ohio State players who clearly vibed with him pretty well over the weekend and liked what they saw, because that doesn't always happen. So something to keep an eye on as Ohio State goes into the game this weekend. If Naeem Offer doesn't show up, that like becomes another sign, I think, for Aiden West to be like, okay, he's probably not going to end up at Ohio State. And I think that will change the way that he views things, maybe even while he's on campus at Michigan State for their big game against Rutgers as Michigan State tries to get bowl eligible. Another player that will not be at Ohio State this weekend is London Merritt. He decommitted from the Buckeyes on Tuesday. He will end up at Colorado. This is a situation very similar to Zahir Mathis. I need to get a drink of water. We're going to take a break. Be right back. Okay, sorry about that. Had a little tickle in the throat. I get so emotional talking about recruiting that sometimes I just can't bear to do it anymore without taking a break. So London Merritt decommits. As I said, this is a situation, Andrew, very similar to what happened with Zahir Mathis, which is, simply put, Ohio State had an evaluation and evaluation on London Merritt and what they thought he was worth from the NIL perspective. Merritt's camp thought he was worth more, and Ohio State wasn't going to budge, and other teams are willing to pay more. But it's also not just that. It's also an opportunity for London Merritt to play much earlier in Colorado than he would at Ohio State. So when you combine the chance to play much earlier and the opportunity to maybe make a little more scratch, it seems like it's a kind of like a no-brainer for him, especially on a team that now in Colorado is one of the darlings of college football and people think is going to be a program on the rise.
Yeah, I don't know. I've got kind of mixed thoughts on this. So first of all, he is kind of in that weird size, 6'2", 230, 240, something. He's kind of in that weird range where it's like, where do you put him? Kind of reminds me of that, what was it, that Tumisi Adelaide guy a couple years back that ended up, I don't know, committed to like 45 different schools. But so I get it as far as that goes. But the problem I have with this is, like, people are going to be asking again, is this a Larry Johnson problem? Because last year Ohio State signed one top 100 defensive lineman in Edric Houston. He's probably going to be a superstar, moved to defensive tackle. Then you took some project types like the Eric Mensahs of the world. And now with losing,
we had Dominic Kirks in that class as well.
Yeah, they did flip Donovan Kirks from Washington. But now in this class, you're down to one top 100 guy in Zion Grady. Now you've lost Mathis, you've lost Merritt. So, like, it went from looking like a very, very promising defensive line class a few months ago to now looking like kind of, I don't want to say meh, but maybe missing some of the star power and some of the bodies. But they've got a couple other guys out there yet, so we'll see. Yeah,
and this is the thing. I immediately came to the defense of Larry Johnson on social media on Tuesday when this happened, because the reason that London Merritt has decided to decommit has nothing to do with Larry Johnson. And now that doesn't mean that Larry Johnson is infallible in this situation, because I do think we've known that there was this possibility of London Merritt decommitting for a few months now. There should have been, or you would expect there to have been, a very clear backup plan, knowing that Ohio State needs depth on the defensive line. And it seems to be a recurring issue that Larry Johnson has not had someone ready to go in that situation. And that, I think, is a fair criticism and a fair concern about what it means for Ohio State moving forward. Now, that said, when you had three commitments at edge, and it's Zahir Mathis, and it's London Merritt, and it's Zion Grady, the one that you are like, okay, the one that has a chance to play next year is Zion Grady. Okay. So he's the one that you have to keep. We are, as we talked about on the last episode of this show, going into such a weird time in college football roster management and roster building that old me, like me 3 years ago, would be super concerned about the lack of depth at defensive end. And I'm just not anymore, because if a player is not going to play as a freshman, they are completely interchangeable in a recruiting class anymore. And that, with the exception of quarterback, which is a developmental position, because obviously I don't expect Tavian St. Clair to play much next year for Ohio State, but he's not immediately replaceable in this class like a player like Zahir Mathis would be by a defensive end prospect like Chaz Coleman out of Warren G. Harding, who's making an official visit to Ohio State this weekend. I think London Merritt's going to be a really good player, but he's a 6'2", 230-pound defensive end who maybe ends up as a 6'3", 250-pound defensive tackle in Colorado. Like I see the loss, and I understand why people are concerned of what it means for Larry Johnson. Is it a sign that he's not all in and he's going to be gone? All these things are like fair conversations, but the reality of this situation is that Zahir Mathis and London Merritt were not going to play next year any significant role for Ohio State. And therefore, if they're asking for dollar amounts or expecting dollar amounts that are akin to what Ohio State would be able to pay for a starter out of a mid-major program, and again, I bring up Mike Green at Marshall because he's, I think in my mind, the perfect example of what every major college football program is going to be looking for this offseason as the transfer portal happens. There's no doubt in my mind that money and those resources are better allocated for Mike Green at Marshall. Like, no doubt at all. But that doesn't negate the fact that there are concerns about Larry Johnson's willingness to cultivate relationships with potential backup plans on the defensive line. Even Chaz Coleman, who I think Ohio State will end up flipping him from Penn State, where he committed just 3 weeks ago. I think they will flip him, but like there was some reluctance on Coleman's part to even schedule an official visit because like I don't think that he really felt the relationship had been built to the point where he felt like he was a priority for Ohio State at this point. And so, no, he's going to make his visit. I think Ohio State, this is always the funny part of these recruitments and decommitments. And I know I get accused of wearing scarlet colored glasses and all that stuff. If you stack up Zahir Mathis and Chaz Coleman next to each other, you're not going to see a significant difference in their size, in their speed, in their anything. I think Chaz Coleman is a better natural athlete than Zahir Mathis. I think Chaz Coleman will likely end up being a better defensive lineman. But this is a kid that's played quarterback and tight end and all these other spots for Warren G. Harding. But he's also from Ohio, so like you don't worry as much about potentially a kid decommitting or transferring a year from now if he's not right. You don't worry about that as much. I believe he's also like second cousins with Maurice Clarett. So like there's all of these other things involved here that make Chaz Coleman likely long-term a better recruiting decision for Ohio State than Zahir Mathis would have been. But Zahir Mathis was ranked really early because he was at a big-time high school in Philadelphia. Did he get better? I don't know. I mean, I've never seen him play in person. I've seen him at camp, and I was, as you and I talked about at the time, like I was like, I'm not sure I see it entirely, but you see the raw material. Chaz Coleman is a player that has gotten way better since he was a junior in high school to now a senior in high school. And like that used to be how you build a recruiting class. And now because everything is so sped up and we prioritize early rankings over actual player development, but also player fit, we get so wrapped up in like London Merritt is a top 100 player. I get it. He's a good player. But if Ohio State can flip Epi Citinelli or Citinlay or whatever his name is from California, and I don't mean whatever his name is in a dismissive tone, I just don't know how to pronounce it. Citinelay, I think, from St. John Bosco in California. I'm sorry. I've watched, and this is, I guess I'm going to get into the weeds here. I've seen a number of IMG players over the years come into a college program and have no idea what they're doing. And I can't say I've ever seen that from St. John Bosco kids, you know? So like Citinlay, I'm just going to assume that's how I pronounce it. Okay. He's a 6'5", 215-pound defensive end for one of the best programs in the country. I guess I'd rather take that kid. And I know that will sound like revisionist history or sour grapes, but like you're building a roster here, you're building a program. The odds of a kid from St. John Bosco transferring after 1 year if he doesn't play are way lower than a kid from IMG transferring if he doesn't play. And that's just the facts of the matter. And it will always sound like I'm defending the Ohio State coaches or the Ohio State approach to the nth degree. And maybe in some ways I am, but it's because I'm doing that because I genuinely believe it's correct. Like, I don't think it's short-sighted of Ohio State to say, we don't believe that this player is worth $500,000, so we're not going to pay it, as opposed to saying, well, the player's mom said he's worth it, so we have to pay. Like, I don't, that's crazy to me.
Yeah, I can see the craziness. Just real quick to put a bow on defensive line stuff. So they have 3 defensive tackles committed. Jarquez Carter is being courted by Miami and Florida. So we'll see about that. But I like their defensive tackles they have. They've got Zion Grady at defensive end. So you think they would potentially take Coleman and the UCLA commit? I'm just going to call him Epi. You think they could they would potentially take both of those? I assume they would not bring them in this weekend if they were not going to take them both, in addition to what they have.
That's correct. And I think there was actually some discussion and some worry on the part of the Chaz Coleman camp that Ohio State would not accept a commitment from him. And I don't know where that came from. It's probably like from the Penn State side. I think James Franklin does a good job of trying to convince kids that Ohio State is playing them or whatever. This is not like the old days where it's after, it's December 10th and you're bringing in someone for an evaluation. Like, signing day is next week. Like, you're not bringing in this kid unless you're willing to say yes. Satanale, however, again, I don't mean to be disrespectful. I don't know how to pronounce it. Satanale, I've not been able to get a response from him to get a pronunciation guide. But yeah, they will take both of these kids if they want to commit to Ohio State. Otherwise, they would not be bringing them in. There's enough going on this weekend on the recruiting front that Ohio State and enough going on playing Michigan and everything at stake that they are not bringing in kids for official visits that they have to spend all this extra time with just for S's and G's and G's. That's not happening. So London Merritt's out. That's what we know.
I was just going to say, if they keep the 4 defensive linemen they've got committed now, the 3 tackles and the 1 edge, and they add those 2 guys we just mentioned, I will be 100% totally fine, perfectly on board with the defensive line class. So that's the finish that I'm hoping for right now.
But either way, even if they sign those 2 alongside Zion Grady, they're still going to need to go out and find someone in the transfer portal to be a starter because I mean, you have Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson coming back. And this is where I've seen a lot of pushback. Like, you don't know what's going to be in the portal. You can't project what's going to be there. So you don't know how many guys you can get or how many quality players you're going to get or what potential start. There are no rules anymore, man. Like, anyone you want in college football, if you want to figure out a way to do a temperature check and them potentially transferring, it takes about 3 seconds to find that out. Like, it is, call it tampering, call it cheating. There are no rules anymore. Like, you can find out who's leaving. You're Ohio State. You can get people to leave their school. It happens all the time. Like, we are going to see, when this transfer portal opens in 3 weeks, like, one of the most insane things we've ever seen in college football. Like, it's going to be absolutely nuts. So, like, again, I've said this the last couple times we've done this show, but like, it feels disappointing to me as someone who has made a career and a living and loves high school recruiting the way that I do, to feel like it has lost some value, but like, it has lost some value. Like, it is not the only way to build a program anymore. And yeah, it has to be the backbone of the program for sure. But I think more and more we're entering a roster building era where for programs like Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, Michigan, et cetera, you need to find 10 or 11 guys in each recruiting class that are like surefire. We know these guys are going to be the dudes, because you can't have 25 first round picks. Like, it's how many years have you played Madden on Xbox or PlayStation?
I have not played Madden in probably, I can't even remember the last time.
Okay. My point is, remember when you used to play and
yes,
you'd trade all your players for first round picks?
Yeah,
and
I remember that.
You would just draft 11 first round picks and you'd be like, this is awesome. And then it was super awesome for 1 year, because then you had to pay them all and you had to trade all those guys for first round picks. Like, that, you can't build a roster that way. You have to see things in a different way. And it is hard because we have been so accustomed in the Ohio State recruiting space to just taking 25 first round picks every year. And like, sorry, like it can't happen. I'm not suggesting London Merritt's a first round pick, but he wants to be paid like one. And a lot of that comes from just being committed to Ohio State for so long. Like this is the weird catch-22. It's like, well, I've been committed to Ohio State. I'm worth this. And other teams are like, oh, dude, this dude's been committed to Ohio State. He's worth this. And like Ohio State's like, we actually brought you in the class because we thought maybe you would be willing to not demand that. So now it becomes this. I'm so much more on board with waiting until like November to build out player 12 through 25 in a recruiting class than I ever have been before. Like, get your core group, get your core dozen, get your Tavion St. Clairs and your Devin Sanchez's and your Zion Grady's, and then the rest of it you just backfill because you're still going to have to supplement from the transfer portal to bring in starters because you're losing tons of starters to the NFL. You're losing guys to the transfer portal. Like, it's such a weird time, and we're still trying to value recruiting and high school recruiting the same way we always have, and it's not possible. I don't know. We're at 45 minutes here. We should probably talk about the people who are going to be on campus this week. That's going to start with Naeem Offord, who is still, as of Wednesday, the expectation is that he and his family will be in Columbus this weekend for the game against Michigan. I don't know, Andrew, like on a scale of 1 to 10, how do things change in your mind about Naeem Offord's ultimate decision if he visits this weekend or doesn't? Like, if he does visit, where does your confidence go in him signing with Ohio State and versus where it goes if he doesn't? And what is it now? Let's just play that game. Right now, I would say I have like a 4.5 confidence that he stays with his commitment and signs with Ohio State. If he shows up for this game this weekend, I will move that to like a 6.5. If he doesn't, it's like a 0.
Yeah, I was going to say my confidence right now is like a 3.5. If he shows up this weekend, maybe it's closer to a 5. If he doesn't show up this weekend, then I'm with you. It's probably close to a 0. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's an expectation that the majority of the Ohio State recruiting class will be in town. I know Nate Roberts will not be because of just scheduling with his football game on Friday night and the inability to get from Oklahoma to Ohio State in time for the game. So, like, if Offord and his family shows up, they're going to be surrounded by the entire Ohio State recruiting class, all of the families. Like, this is the weekend to lock things up. If he doesn't, I think Ohio State at that point has to head into Sunday morning saying, all right, man, we appreciate everything and good luck at Auburn or Oregon, wherever you end up, because we know that you're not coming here. And again, like, it sucks because he is in that core group of 10 or 11 guys that you're like, hey, this is who you build around. But they've done everything they can to make sure that Naeem Offord doesn't go somewhere else. And what else can you do?
Yeah, I mean, he finally got to see a Auburn win this past weekend,
yeah,
so that was
storm the field.
Big. Yeah, storm the field. There you go. But you said the Ohio State staff, as of now, is expecting him in town this weekend, right?
Yep, that is the expectation. There is an expectation, obviously, that TJ Alford will be in town this weekend. There's an expectation that Jarquez Carter will be in town this weekend. Like, all these guys are expected to be there. So all of the players that have been talked about as being on the fence, I'm not sure about Quincy Porter. Let me be honest there. I have not heard one way or another if he's expected. It's a big weekend. But we know about commitments that are going to be in town. That's less relevant, except for Naeem Offord and TJ Alford. I think those are the two and Jarquez Carter. Like, those guys show up, and then it's a conversation that probably needs some more diving into when we do a talking stuff next week before signing day. But if they don't show up, that's a negative. And it's hard to spin it any other way. One guy that is still currently on the list of expected showing uppers is Jakeem Stewart, the 5-star defensive end from New Orleans, who has been predicted by rival Sam Spiegelman, On3, Steve Wiltfong, and a few other people this week to end up signing with USC. I am, as we record this on midweek, I'm like at a 2 or 3 about him actually showing up this weekend. I have been trying my best to downplay Ohio State's chances in this battle. I have seen a consistent push on social media from other like Ohio State affiliated or Ohio State recruiting centric characters and websites trying to suggest that there's something happening here with Jakeem Stewart, that he's been like penciled in as the replacement for Zahir Mathis, and that's why no one cared, that that is just patently false. Since his visit to Ohio State for the Nebraska game, which went fine, it's just been very clear that Ohio State was not going to participate as fully in the NIL operation here as other schools. Yeah, as other schools are going to. And now that said, there's a week to signing day. I know Larry Johnson and the defensive line staff is still pushing to try and get that sort of commitment from the powers that be at Ohio State, because this is the hard part. And I asked this about Ryan Day a week ago, or maybe 2 weeks ago, when Zahir Mathis decommitted. Like, I don't know how you properly evaluate an assistant coach as a recruiter in the context of this new era of college football, because if Coach A does everything right and you get player B to the point where player B says, "Hey man, I'm ready to commit. I just need to know, is dollar amount X going to be available?" And Coach A goes to the administration and says, "Hey, is this amount available? This is what player B needs. And if he gets it, he's in." And then the administration says, "Nope, sorry, that's not possible." There's really nothing the coach can do about it. And then the player picks somewhere else, and the coach gets excoriated on social media, and he can't close, and he's a bad coach, and blah, blah, blah. So, like, if all things were equal here, I do think Ohio State would be much higher in this conversation, but all things are not equal. And so unless Ohio State, I'm going to quote Animal Farm here, some people are more equal than others. That's not really a direct quote. I'm going to, gonna paraphrase, but it's not equal. And so it's hard to view Ohio State as a legitimate contender. Even if Jakeem Stewart does show up this weekend, I think that the die has been cast in this recruitment, and I don't think he'll end up at Ohio State.
I do find it funny that USC was primarily being talked about as the fourth team in that race, and then he takes a visit to SoCal, and now it's like Cali dreaming, crystal ball. I also liked how Sam put in that pick and the other outlets were bashing him. And then 24 hours later, all the other picks are coming in on the other sites for USC as well. So I don't know. I didn't expect him to end up at USC, but I guess if I had to pick between USC or Oregon, I'd rather him be at USC than Oregon, I suppose. So maybe that's a silver lining.
Let's say all NIL opportunities are equal, but some NIL opportunities are more equal than others. Let's just put it that way. I don't know. I'd rather him not end up in the Big Ten personally.
Yeah, I get. Yeah, true.
If even LSU is going, sorry, that's too much, then you know that the shark has been jumped here. So we'll see. There's a number of ways it could still go between now and then. I think sometimes these, like, the players or their handlers or their agents leak information to say, "Oh, this is what we're thinking," in order to leverage other things and to get other people more invested. So we'll see. Look at the visitors list for the weekend, Andrew. Who else is standing out to you outside of the official visitors, which as of now we're expecting 3: Jakeem Stewart, Chaz Coleman, and Ippy Sitanley.
Yeah, I mean, for the 2025 class, that's mostly it. But if we're looking beyond that, we've talked about Brady Edmonds pretty regularly here as maybe the guy to circle in 2027 for quarterback. I see he's coming back. I don't know if there's still been talk about Texas and Penn State on his end. And I know, again, it's 2027. They probably would rather not. They would probably rather continue to evaluate him. But I know he's very fond of Ohio State. So I'm kind of watching that one, I guess. That's one that I'm watching.
Yeah.
Is that one I should be watching?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this is a visit that's happening for a reason. I think it'll be his second in 5 weeks to Columbus from California. You're absolutely right. I think Ohio State's preference would be to continue evaluating quarterbacks in the class of 2027. It is still very early. He just finished up his sophomore year. Like, he's really good. There's a lot of reason to be excited about it, but I don't know. It's not the same situation as Jameer Brown, in my opinion, because quarterbacks who plateau as a sophomore in high school are not good enough to play in college football for very long, which is different than, like, if Jameer Brown never gets better than he is now, and he's a 10'4", 6'1", 185-pound kid for the rest of his life, like, that's still pretty good, and you can still always run by people. You can still do those things. That's not the same at quarterback. I think that I believe that this visit is being made as a business trip for Brady Edmonds, so we'll see where things go. But he's going to have an opportunity to connect with a number of really big-time 2027 prospects on offense. Dakota Garant from Michigan, who will be making his 4th visit to Ohio State since June. He got some predictions to Michigan this week, and I think based solely on the Bryce Underwood money and the Bryce Underwood influence, but 4th visit for Dakota Garant. Miles McCaffey, a wide receiver from North Carolina, he visited this summer for Ohio State, camped, offered. He's coming back. Luke Brewer, a big-time tight end out of Iowa in the 2027 class. He'll be visiting big time there. I think that there's some talk about Sincere Johnson revisiting this weekend. He visited for the Indiana game. Sincere told me on Tuesday that he's still debating between Ohio State, Michigan, Texas A&M, or Alabama, Auburn. So he could be at any one of those spots. We'll see where he shows up. Long term, I don't think it matters. I think he's going to end up in Ohio State's class, but it's one of those opportunities to go see some really good games elsewhere over a holiday weekend. And he's been to Ohio State 3 times this year, so he may skip that. Chris Henry Jr. will be back in town. That's obviously very important for Ohio State because Oregon is making some headway there. I still find myself in the same camp I always felt I was in with Jeremiah Smith, which is what I talked about earlier with Jameer Brown. If Brian Hartline's there, I don't think you worried that much about Chris Henry, especially as the quarterback play continues to be great. 2 players I really think are worth watching this weekend, maybe not for like immediate commitments, but Ohio State in the class of 2026 is going to go really, really hard at the country's best safeties. And Jarrah Edwards from Baltimore and Braylon Womack from Mississippi will both be in town. Womack is an absolute, like, Caleb Downs type stud. Like, he is a must get. If you're looking at must gets, he fits that category. He loves Ohio State. So just keep an eye on Braylon Womack there. But I'm trying to think of anybody else that is worth like really discussing. Sam Greer expected to be at Ohio State this weekend along with Albert Hill. I think there's a chance maybe Greer is the first of the in-state offensive linemen to pull the trigger for Ohio State. I'm not going to predict this weekend, but I'm just going to say that I think that there's at least an opportunity there.
We talked earlier about you and I's own levels of confidence on name offered. So going back to 2025 real quick, with Tarvos Alford, TJ Alford, do you still get the vibe that Ohio State feels like he is ending up in the class? I know some picks came in for Miami recently, and I just wasn't sure if there's anything new there.
I don't know if there's anything new that's like official reporting. My gut instinct, and from talking to TJ and talking to people around him, I don't think he wants to be anywhere other than Ohio State. I think he just wants to make sure that Ohio State is as committed to him as he is to them. And again, there are conversations, I guess, similar to the London Merritt stuff and the Zahir Mathis stuff. I don't think Ohio State views it the same way. I think they're willing to be a little bit more probably flexible with a player like TJ because he is so different than anything they have on the roster and a player that can contribute early for the Buckeyes in a number of ways. And if he makes it, I'm with TJ. Let me say, like, I would be shocked if TJ comes into town this weekend and ends up signing with Miami. Like, that would shock me. But I've also heard from people around that recruitment that it's Florida State that's actually the team that he has a better vibe for than Miami. So anything can happen. But I know from talking to that kid for the last 2 years, like, I do not believe for a single second he wants to go anywhere other than Ohio State. So And James, the James Laurinaitis done a great job building the relationship. The coaching staff at Ohio State feels like he has been honest with them about every one of his concerns. When there's been discussions about how NIL is being presented from the home state schools and what they're willing to do to make sure family gets to games and all this other stuff, like Ohio State is well aware of it, and they're going to have to figure out a way around it. So that's where we are. But again, I've learned in the last couple recruiting cycles to never say like firmly I know something, because things are so different now than they've ever been. But I am very confident TJ Alford does not want to go anywhere else other than Ohio State. Like he is, from the first time he stepped foot on campus, Ohio State is where he wanted to go. And that has not changed. The relationship that he has with James Laurinaitis is great. Like it would be like, I've been dismissive of other decommitments and stuff like that because of the change of college football. That's one that I think would be like, man, that sucks, because like if he ends up somewhere else, I don't think it's entirely because he was making a decision that was based on what he felt he wanted to do. And that's depressing, because like you're an 18-year-old kid, you should be able to follow your heart. And I don't know, man, I'm going to get sentimental again, Andrew, but go back 4 years. And if you told me like, hey, I get to go play football at Ohio State and make $250,000, like, or $400,000 or whatever the amount is, like that would be pretty damn good. And now it's like, well, not enough. Like, man, how did we get here so fast? Like, how did it get so bad so fast? Anyway, TJ Alford is certainly one of the biggest remaining questions in the class of 2025. Ohio State still looking for an answer from Turbo Rogers, the the running back / slot receiver type from Carver High School in Montgomery, Alabama. That's an Ohio State Georgia battle till next week. Quincy Porter, it seems like it's Ohio State or Penn State heading into next week. We've got the discussion about David Sanders, which again, Tennessee, the longer it goes without any other news happening, I think the more you'll start to see the Tennessee side act puffed up a little bit, say, oh yeah, we're fine, he's going to stick. I don't know that it actually matters or means anything if that's what occurs, but I think that the longer this goes without a flip or without a announcement of a return to Ohio State, you're going to see the Tennessee people be more confident that they're going to weather the storm. Defensive line, there's still Micah DeBose out there who Ohio State is still trying to get on campus this weekend. From what I understand, there was some discussion about him and his family being in town for the holiday. The speculation was that there was like a family car accident over the weekend or end of last week that is now preventing the whole family from traveling to Ohio, which would be obviously a pretty bad sign for Ohio State about getting him on campus. But they're still trying to win that fight against Alabama. Defensive end we've talked about. Defensive tackle we've talked about. We just saw on Tuesday, Miles Autry, the Auburn commit, Malik Autry, sorry, closed down his recruitment and is not going to visit Ohio State this weekend, which is not a surprise. He's talked about being back at Ohio State since he took his official visit and never did. What else?
Quincy Porter, what I know you mentioned him, but do you get the vibe that the Ohio State level of concern is fairly low on that one, or what's your take there?
The level of concern is low, but that doesn't mean that the risk of a flip are low, if that makes sense. Like Brian Hartline is so supremely confident in what he does with his guys that he's not going to be concerned about one player flipping regardless. Like he has a room next year that he's going to love no matter what. It's okay. Jeremiah Smith was offered 3 to 4 to 5, depending on who you listen to, 7 to 8 times the amount of money to stay home and play at Florida State or Miami as he got to come to Ohio State, allegedly. Now, he decided to still go to Ohio State because of what the opportunity as a wide receiver at Ohio State brings. If Quincy Porter is being offered 2 times, 3 times the amount that Ohio State is willing to pay at other schools like Penn State, which is what I've heard, then he's going to have to make a similar decision. Like what matters? And But what I know is that the Ohio State staff is not going to freak out about wide receiver. So they want Quincy Porter in the class. They think he's going to be a superstar, but they also can point to say, well, here's what Jeremiah Smith decided. Here's what Carnell Tate decided. Here's what Brandon Ennis decided. What makes you different than those guys?
Right.
And that's a conversation for Quincy Porter and his family to have. Ohio State's wide receivers in the NFL are making like $250 million. I find it very difficult to suggest that Ohio State should take a different approach. Like their track record is fine. If he wants to play at Penn State in their offense, then that is. I know people get mad because they think, oh, every time someone goes somewhere else, Berm just says it's about NIL, but like it is. Ohio State has everything else pretty much. I mean, there is no argument for a wide receiver to go anywhere else. So if that's it.
Yeah.
Justin Hill not visiting this weekend. I don't know why that was ever brought up. He
had to have a graphic made to shut down the rumors that were lasting for like 45 minutes.
Yeah, I don't. This is not a conversation. From what I understand, like there had been very, very limited conversation between Justin Hill and Ohio State. Yes, he was invited to Ohio State this weekend. Yes, he's still friendly enough with the coaches to like respond to texts and stuff like that. But there was never a thought that he was going to flip to Ohio State. And then, as we said, there's Aiden West and Naheem Offord and what goes on in that situation. But that's the class of 2025, right? I mean, what else is there?
There's really not anything else. I do kind of wonder if there's like another surprise that pops up on campus this week. I mean, I know you're always on the lookout for that too, but biggest thing is just, does David Sanders show back up or not? And we probably won't know until Saturday morning.
That's probably correct. I know that there have been some speculation about other committed defensive backs showing up. I'm not going to entirely rule that out, but I'm as we sit here with the Thanksgiving holiday the next 2 days, it would seem to be unlikely that Ohio State would be able to facilitate getting somebody else on campus unless it was already done. And there's no real reason for them to go down that path unless they feel confident that Naeem Offord is not sticking and they feel like they can't flip Aiden West. So otherwise there's no reason to go that route. So let's break this down to 4-minute offense. What is on your mind, Andrew, as we wrap up this episode of Talking Stuff and let everyone get to their Thanksgiving events?
Yeah, so lots of offensive line talk today. Obviously, David Sanders is the big talking point, but looking once again at those in-state guys, 2026. You mentioned Sam Greer earlier, but Maxwell Riley, Adam Guthrie, who was recently offered, visiting this weekend, not visiting this weekend. Any updates on potential timelines? Is one closer? Is one more likely than the other? Just kind of where's all that at?
Yeah, I mean, the Max Riley one is the interesting one to me. Adam Guthrie seems much further away from making a decision than Max Riley. Guthrie, who's the latest one to be offered, very interested in Clemson. He was at Georgia. He's been at Texas, doing a lot of travel, seeing a lot of places, very good. Max Riley is like just pretty much back and forth between Ohio State and Clemson. He's not going to visit Ohio State this weekend because of holiday plans with his family. I think he's going to make a commitment in the next couple of weeks. I hesitate to say that he's going to pick Clemson because I know how that will be perceived, but I'm not going to be surprised if he picks Clemson. I do get a little bit of a Blake Miller vibe from his recruitment. And it's a kid who genuinely really likes Ohio State and really likes Justin Fry. But I do wonder if maybe he prefers a smaller environment and wants to be in a place that's a little bit less chaotic than Columbus. College football recruiting to me is so fascinating for a number of reasons, but one of them is because a player like Max Riley can view two different schools that are diametrically opposite, but they both are exceptional programs that win a ton of games. Like you can get whatever you are looking for your college experience in college football somewhere. And I think Max is just trying to decide what he's looking for in an environment to spend the next 4 to 5 years. And I do have a slight gnawing feeling that he might be leaning towards Clemson. But that is in no way an indictment of Ohio State or what he's built with Justin Fry. I think actually heading into this season, and especially heading into his last visit to Ohio State, I think it was like clearly leaning towards Clemson. I don't think that's the case now. And I wouldn't be surprised if, because things are so tight for him, he decides I'm going to wait even longer than I anticipated. But because I do think he's just like has some tug of war happening in his head and heart right now between those two schools. So he's not going to be on campus this weekend. That would be great if he was for Ohio State, or at least as of today, he's told me that's not likely to happen. So just something to keep an eye on there. There are obviously a number of really good offensive linemen around the country. Ohio State is recruiting in the class of 2026. I think Felix Ojo from Texas is supposed to be in town this weekend. He's a big-time kid. They just had Champ Smith from Florida, who's a former high school teammate of TJ Alford's, down in Vero Beach. Like, he loves Ohio State. There's Deron Parks, there's Guthrie, there's Sam Greer, who again I think is closer probably to committing to Ohio State than any of the other guys are, and that's where that falls. But just something to keep an eye on. I feel like this has been a generally positive episode of Talking Stuff, but no one ever thinks I'm positive, so I don't know. But that is certainly not something that I feel like. I don't think it's a done deal by any stretch. It just kind of has a weird feeling for me.
Yeah, I get it. Not going to talk a ton about Michigan. Obviously, the game is on Saturday, but from a recruiting standpoint, Michigan flipped Bryce Underwood. Obviously, we know all the story with that. They came out with a big video about how it happened, blah, 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 NIL. But they were supposedly going to.
I thought it was still illegal for boosters to like talk to recruits.
My favorite clip was the clip of the one Michigan writer who had this long, drawn-out segment saying how Michigan is doing it the right way with how they flipped Bryce Underwood and nobody else is. It's like, I can't believe some of these people are even real with their comments. It's just unfathomable how dumb some of it is, but that's a different conversation. Go ahead.
It's just, as I said, it's hard to imagine how we got here so fast from what we were doing with college football 3 years ago.
Yeah, it is. But once there was this big influx of money at Michigan, they flipped Underwood. There was all this talk about Jakeem Stewart to Michigan. That's not happening. Quincy Porter to Michigan doesn't seem to be happening. Maybe they flipped that Derek Meadows receiver from LSU. But the reason I bring this up is last week, two of Ohio's best cornerbacks, Albert Hill and Victor Singleton, and I know Victor Singleton is from your neck of the woods, were both in Ann Arbor for their game against, what was it, like Northwestern or whomever, somebody bad, instead of Columbus for the Indiana game. Just, do you think this new influx of money at Michigan matters at all in this situation, or are those two guys still ones we should have penciled in for 26?
I would not have Victor Singleton penciled in at Ohio State for 26. Just I think he wants to play the recruiting game a little bit. I would still have Albert Hill in the Ohio State class. He'll be back in town this weekend. Victor Singleton's going to Texas A&M to see the Aggies and Longhorns this weekend. I think Jacob Weatherspoon is in the class at Ohio State before too long. Albert Hill. Yes, Michigan with a lot of money is going to be a much different beast than they have been in the last few years on the recruiting trail. They're going to learn quickly that what I was just talking about, and I think they're actually taking this approach. You got to get those 10 or 11 guys that you have to get, and then everything else you can fill in. I think they're in a unique position because obviously what they have reset the market when it comes to NIL. I've heard some rumblings that the Jakeem Stewart conversation has completely changed money-wise because of what Bryce Underwood is allegedly getting from Michigan, which is why another reason why I think Ohio State is like, okay, we are not going to be involved. But yeah, they're gonna walk around and flash some cash, and they have no problem doing it. Even if they're not doing it themselves, the perception is there, and players around the country are going to be, oh, now I want to go there because now I think they have the money to give me. So we'll see how Michigan actually handles that in practice, as opposed to just in theory, or opposed to just rumors of, the kids around the country are seeing that number. I've heard 13 million for Bryce Underwood. They're going to see that and they're going to, okay, I know I can go get a piece of it there. And we'll see if Michigan actually goes that route. But certainly they're taking full advantage of the momentum that brought. Again, I think it's crazy. I don't know how I don't know how it's legal. because there still are NCAA rules on the books against boosters being directly involved in a kid's recruitment, especially because it's clearly an inducement to go play at Michigan. I don't know how that's allowed. But this is what people wanted. This is what the NCAA is going to get and continue to get, and it's going to get worse and worse until they put some rules in place. So, good luck. It's going to be a wild ride, you know. Yeah, I don't love it.
Yeah.
But as far as the in-state kids in Ohio, I'm not going to rule out Victor Singleton ending up somewhere other than Ohio State. I think I could see that scenario unfolding. But I also think that if Ohio State really ramped up its effort to make sure he felt as prioritized as Jacob Weatherspoon and Albert Hill feel, that it would change things. I don't know that that's happening right now. So
cool. That's all I had, really, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we're in the wild, wild west, and it's going to be hard to stop that until the NCAA wakes up and decides to put some rules in place. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about. We appreciate everyone watching, sticking with us. Sorry about my throat and my voice occasionally dipping out. I don't know. Sometimes there's just dust in the air. I've got 4 animals in my house, folks. There's a lot of just random air particles. It's disgusting. Anyway, hope everyone has a happy Thanksgiving, a wonderful weekend with your families, a happy Saturday, that things go the way everyone wants. I think next week, Andrew and I should be planning on doing a talking stuff. I don't know if we're going to do it before signing day or if we're just going to do it on Wednesday night, the first day of the signing period, when things are actually fleshed out. We'll figure that out depending on what happens this weekend. But we appreciate you being here. Thank you for watching Talking Stuff. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. He's Andrew Ellis. This is the podcast. Please rate, review, subscribe. Make sure you turn on your notifications and tell your friends if they like talking about Ohio State football stuff that they should be joining us on the podcast. We'll see you later.